Alright, 4 questions to ask an atheist. Different phrasing. It's recommendation and advice for fellow Christians. From a channel with 7 subscribers, 99 dislikes, 4 likes. The Jesus Renaissance.
Hey, what's up? Eddie Williams here. Hey, atheism is something that's been on my mind lately. And, if you live in a big city, it's quite common. There's lots of people that don't know God, that are seeking God, that maybe haven't heard of God. And so I
Haven't heard
want to
of
argue
God.
with a few things to talk to them
What a
about
bullshit
because
statement.
I think a lot of the times when we get in conversations with atheists or agnostics,
Very high camera
Christians
quality
are on the
equipment for a
defensive.
channel with
And,
such
and that makes sense
low
because we believe in
subscriber
objective
count.
morality. We believe in a God that says right and wrong, and they want to ask us questions. But oftentimes, atheists in particular have lots of questions that remain unanswered themselves. And so, what I want to arm you to do today is to begin to ask them questions and begin to get them to think and ponder over their own thought process. So, here are 4 questions that you can ask your atheist friend. Number 1, where does objective morality come from, or does it exist at all?
No, it doesn't, and better intellectuals than me have already explained why it's a good thing that there is no objective morality. And here's the two sentiments, essentially. That one, objective morality allows for things that are immoral by modern standards to be permissible in instances as long as it is supposedly the will of God. That's reason number one why objective morality is bad. Reason number two would be that it's outdated, and that we change it all the time because we like to think we improve it all the time, and that it reflects um, our desire to grow and become better over time. So the fact that it's not objective and it's growing means we're becoming more good, at least theoretically, and that's a good thing, even if it's not practically true. Um, it's still the prospect can be true. So the fact that there is no objective morality, essentially, I mean, you couldn't necessarily call it a fact, but for all intents and purposes, it is because there's no evidence of any objective morality. So it's fine to just essentially say there isn't one. It's not a baseless assertion, really. It's a reasonable assumption based on the lack of evidence of any kind of objective morality or God.
Many people that are atheists, they're probably pretty good people, right? They pay their bills on time, they obey the law, they use their turn signal, they do all of the things, they check all the boxes that would say, yes, I'm a good person. I would ask them, why do they do what they do? Why do
Is that a serious question? Why do they do what they do? Are you saying that if they don't believe that God beamed it into their brains that this is the right thing, or he didn't even have the decency to do that, he wrote it on a fucking tablet of forbiddenness, by a God that punishes knowledge and shuns anyone who tries to learn, really? I mean, why? Is that even a question, Obviously, empathy plays a big part in it. And the desire to treat others as you want to be treated, and the lack of interest in hurting other people because you think about how horrible it would be in the reverse. That should be enough. And it's not just about recourse. Oh, they do it because they don't want to have their life be put into chains or whatever. Like, they really just don't have an interest in it most of the time. I mean, yeah, people do speed and stuff, but it's not really a reflection of their moral character. Just maybe they're a bit of a douchebag sometimes, but everyone is sometimes.
they obey these laws if we're just all cells that have evolved over.
What is us being? What we're made of have anything to do with what we are? What we are is independent of what we're comprised of. What we're comprised of simply is the cause of what we are. What we still formulates and makes a being capable of reason. So maybe not so in your case, but what does that have to do with anything? It's just, oh, we're a bunch of cells, so it's okay to kill another bunch of cells. Is that what you're trying to imply? Because those cells, they form a person, and that person can feel, and they live a life of influence, and people care about them. And people realize this, and they think it's wrong to do that because they wouldn't not only want it done to them, but they wouldn't want it done to people they care about. And they have empathy and they care. That's fucking why.
Millions and millions of years, then what's the point? What's the purpose? Is there purpose at all?
There doesn't have to be a real purpose. You can find your own, and that's the wonder and beauty of it. And that's more meaningful than just reading a book that just gave you one. That's basically, religious communism. You are assigned at birth. This is what you're going to do.
And
This is your purpose. Is that really right? If you really believe that, why don't you want communism then? I'm going to assume you don't.
if there is purpose, then what's the objective standard for that purpose? And what I mean by that,
Why do you want an objective standard? That makes evil permissible, and it means that good is outdated. It's a relic. You can't update the system. You can't become more enlightened. You can't say, well, oh, with this in mind, it says that these people aren't allowed here, and if they should cross this land, then we have to kill them or whatever. Why is that good? Truly, if you want to have a good system, you have to reflect, and that means changing the system. The fact that it's not objective, and the fact that it's about growth is a good thing.
that is, where is the ultimate moral law coming from? If it doesn't come from God, where does it come from? Because
There is no ultimate moral law, and that's a good thing because it would be standard and stationary, and we wouldn't have any chance for growth.
does it come from the universe? Does it come from our own thinking? Is it all subjective? Is there
It may be subjective, but we formulate opinions. Not all subjective is equally valid. Some things are stupid and are based on faulty reasoning, and then we make fun of that. We expose it. We use what works and we discard what doesn't, and we have compassion.
is there no law? And if that is the case, then why do we obey our worldly
Because
laws?
it helps society function. And because we have innate empathy, it helped us survive. Because we're a social species.
What's the point of not murdering?
It seems to me that you're the one who wants to do all this stuff, and maybe that's a straw man. I'm not saying you want to do all these things, but you're making it out to be like the only reason that we shouldn't do these things is because of an absolute law. Like they're not wrong without it, and therefore why not do it? That seems to be what you're saying.
Or not stealing. What's the point of that? And so these are questions that
Because obviously it hurts other people, and they care.
have to be answered. Question
Because of
number two: how
empathy,
do
it's
we get
already been
energy out
answered.
of non-energy? This is an important one. We
What
hear
does that even mean, energy out of non-energy? Energy and matter convert.
scientists talk a lot about the Big Bang and how the Big Bang kind of started forth in motion everything in the universe. But where did this original matter come from? Where did this original energy come from to be able to build up and then shoot across the universe?
That's unknown. But so is your God hypothesis. It's meaningless. We don't know the answer, therefore we should make an assumption, and a really silly one that has all sorts of ridiculous notions in it and bad implications. We should do that. See, I wouldn't mind you having I'm not satisfied with a lack of knowledge. We should pursue that. I wouldn't mind that attitude. But what you're basically saying is, we don't know, therefore let's presume we do know.
Where does this come from? We believe
Because
in
it's more
God
convenient.
as Christians, and even the people of other faiths, they believe God is God,
Yawn.
and God is the originator, God's eternal, that He began all of this. But for the atheists, they don't have that reference point. So where did this come from? Is this just some sort of random thing that happened? And if it is, how did that energy begin in the first place? Where is that potential energy coming from? How was
Pointless
it created?
question.
How did it
I mean, I'm
form?
not saying it's pointless in itself, but you're trying to use it as some sort of like you don't have a foundation. Ignorance is not a bad thing. Okay? It means you can learn. And it's a good thing to be able to learn. But you want to shut that down and say we know the answer when you don't. And I'm really getting sick of the similarity of your position. It's
These are
just
all questions that
annoying.
need to be asked. The third question I'd ask is, where does transcendent emotion come from? Now, this is a more of a subjective question, but think about ideas like love and hate and joy.
What
Where
does
do
that
those emotions come
transcend?
from? Do they play some sort of social utility? Is that the reason why we have love?
I don't know. Maybe that's partially true. But whether or not that's the case, it has no bearing on our actuality, okay? How something came into being and the fact and the consequence of it is two separate entities. Look at this. A war is born, okay? Two factions, they're rivals, they end up at war for whatever reason. The consequence of war is not the same thing as the cause. The reason behind something ceases to matter in the actuality almost immediately. Why you're here does not matter on the day to day of anything. You have to deal with the realities of life and war and whatever else, and why doesn't really matter because it doesn't change the fact that you still have to deal with it. So it's ultimately just stupid.
Love and why we have hate and why we have joy and some other emotions like frustration. Where do
It
these?
doesn't matter why. That we have them means we can now use them and to try and live meaningful, emotionally fulfilling lives. It's not necessarily an answerable question. How something came to be doesn't necessarily address the why. It doesn't need an answer because it's the same vein as why is this war start, and then you look at what is the consequence and an actual result of that. That's what counts. Ultimately, the why doesn't really matter because it's an incidental in most things. And then from there that becomes your reality, and then you have to base off that, and you do the best you have with what you have, and that's good enough.
Things come from. Oftentimes, you'll find that your atheist friend, they have people they love. They love their mom, they love their husband, they love their wife, whatever it is. They love these people. Why do they love them? And
Why do they love them? You do realize you don't have a better answer for that. Even if you believe in God, the mechanism for which God makes you love is still just as the same thing as it is naturally. The only difference is that it's even less meaningful because apparently God decided who you loved. He decided the way that bioorganic process worked. He decided the way that you would love. He decided the way you would hate. He decided who you would love and hate. Doesn't that just make it all invalid and meaningless? You know, the fact that you're trying to presume that God exists and that this is the implication of your being true. If you're being correct, it's meaningless. Love is even more meaningless if it's God's design.
and oftentimes the answer you'll get is, well, it's social utility. See, if I didn't love my spouse, then I couldn't pass off my genetic offspring, and so on and so forth. But I'd ask, why do we love other things? Why do we love people that have passed away? And there's no social.
Because they are a remnant echo in you, and you can't just erase something. See, the fact we formulate memory, it helps us survive, and this is just a consequence of that process. Evolution isn't perfect. Let's look at that and posit that it's absolutely true. You loved them so that you would procreate, and then they died, and then you still love them because you remember it. And that's just a consequence of memory, which was another part of survival. So it's two consequences. It doesn't they fit, okay? There's no, oh, this disproves that or whatever. It's stupid.
Utility in loving someone who's dead. What's the social utility?
It doesn't have to have one. It had one, and now you remember that it had one because it's a consequence of memory.
And really loving pizza or loving ballet.
You love these things because they stimulate chemicals in your brain, and they release certain pleasure centers. That's why you love them, because your brain knows that those things are supposed to feel good, and they help you survive by helping you discern. It's the same sort of chemicals that help you discern danger and react. You're supposed to be able to know if something is bad, like a bad odor. You avoid that. You wouldn't avoid a nice, pleasant thing. And maybe there's some sort of biological imperative associated with that says that it's a drive to eat because food tastes good. And we develop taste so that we would want to eat because it helps us survive. You can look at that as a biological imperative, but it doesn't matter with what it is because the consequence of it is that food tastes good and we eat it. Therefore, because we're self-aware beings that are fucking hungry and that want things and have cravings. What does it matter how it happened? It has happened, and we have to deal with that, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Hey, what's the social utility in that? So we do have these emotions, and they do need explanation because if we are just stardust.
Shut up. Okay? The fact that hypothetically God exists does not change the mechanism for any of this. It just changes the reason. And it makes it all even more meaningless.
We're just cells and chemical reactions bumping into one another, evolving over the millions and millions of years, then there has to be some sort of answer from the atheist perspective of why we do these things. And if maybe there is no answer, then I would submit to the atheist and say, well, there's no reason for you to love anything. Lastly, and I get a little more.
That's nonsense. There's no reason for you to love anything. You love your spouse because it feels nice and because you have an attachment to that person. That's enough of a reason. That's your reason. If you love someone and it feels good and it feels right to you, it doesn't matter if that's biological programming or you're in the Matrix or that it's all just a lie. Who gives a shit? It's unverifiable, and it feels nice in the meantime. That's enough of a reason that a human being would do it, because people just want what's comforting and nice. That's the reason religion even exists. So knock it off.
More personal with this question. If there is no God, does your life have meaning? I just
If there is a God, does your life have meaning? It's communism. It's just you are assigned this purpose. Is that really fucking meaningful?
pose that. Does your life have meaning? So,
You derive your own. And that's way more meaningful than having it imposed into you by a being.
is there things you're passionate about? Are there loves like art or science, things that you really, really care
That's
about? Are
self
there acts of
expression,
charity or passion projects that you're involved with?
which is
And if
beautiful.
so, why? Why do you support the homeless efforts in your city? Why do you
Empathy.
care about the refugee crisis? Why
Empathy.
do you recycle? Why do you care if
Caring
a
about the
dog is
environment
abused
for
in the
practical
family? Why do you
reasons.
support rescue animal shelters? What is
Empathy.
the purpose behind all of these things? If
Man,
we
you're a
are
really
all
big
just
idiot.
cells that have evolved over time and we all
I'm not sure that you're a bad person who wants to go out there and kill people, but it's not that you want to do these things, but it's that you presume that everyone else should have the reason to do that. Like why don't you? It seems to me that you're saying, that from your perspective you might as well. And you seem genuinely interested in like humanity and why people don't just kill each other all the time, because it wouldn't function us as a society. And that goes against basically a social species design. And when I say design, I do not mean intelligent design. I just mean the naturalistic process of a social species. They're social, and so that's instilled in them innately, and therefore they just do that. And as a species, we may be able to transcend that in individual cases, but mostly we don't. Mostly we don't even question our programming. We just act
eventually
and
will
we
die and
react.
return to the earth and
And
to give
I'm not
nutrients.
saying we're a waste of space in a way, because I don't like that phrasing, but people who don't question anything and just live their empty-headed lives, I'm not trying to say they don't deserve to live, but they are a waste of space in a way. They're just taking up space. They're just occupying space and time, and they're not really contributing anything meaningful or interesting or adding anything to the equation. They're just existing for a time and then they're not. What is the purpose of that? That seems completely hollow and empty to me.
To the ground, and so that the circle of life will continue, or something like that from the Lion King. If that's the case, then why do we care about marginalized people? Why do we care
Righteousness,
if a homeless person
justice,
goes hungry? Why do we care if a child starves or if someone's
empathy,
molested or raped? Why does that touch
empathy
us
and
at our very
justice.
core? Ultimately, if
See,
we're
in that
atheists,
case, we care about the victim, which is empathy, but we care about justice, which is the rapist.
city, why do you care about the refugee crisis? Why do you recycle? Why do you care if a dog is abused in a family? Why do you support rescue animal shelters? What is the purpose behind all of these things? If we are all
What is the purpose behind them? Behind helping, or behind that they happen in the first place to need to be helped? Well, they happen because it's a consequence of oftentimes just people's indifference. And people help because they want to go against the grain, because they're disgusted by the darker side of humanity. Because they have empathy and they give a shit. And that is programming. It is innately instilled in them. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't listen to it. At the end of the day, you have to be programmed. There's nothing you can do about that, but you can at least be aware of it and try and in marginal ways just sort of make incremental differences to your programming, going against the grain a little bit, getting away from
just cells
just mindless
that
existence.
have evolved over time, and we all eventually will die and return to the earth and to give nutrients to the ground, and so that the circle of life will continue, or something like that from the Lion King. If that's the case, then
It's
why
not
do we
like from the
care about
Lion King.
marginalized people? Why do we care if a homeless person goes hungry? Why do we care if a child starves or if someone's molested or raped? Why does that touch us at our very core?
Because it's innately instilled in us to have empathy, because we're a social species. Does that make it truly an outrageous thing that it happens? Not necessarily. But we're going to see it that way because we're programmed to see it that way, because it makes our species thrive.
Ultimately,
That is the way, the cause for it. But the cause is not the reality of it. The reality is that it is that way for our species, and that now, because of that programming, we care. That's the reality, and because we care, we'll do something about it. And because we feel that that's a good thing, we'll call that beautiful, and we'll live more meaningful lives, at least according to us, which we decide, and not some arbitrary bullshit creator that you just made up. Not you personally. but that you're so gullible as to believe.
If we're the atheists, we should believe in Charles Darwin's theory and that the survival of the fittest, right? The stronger eat the weak. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with great countries destroying and ransacking?
That's not what it means. It means that species that are ultimately mindless, they don't actually go and trample and conquer other species. First of all, they try to survive and pass their genetic code on. We can do that without destroying each other. So that's not even what it fucking says in the first place. But as far as it pertains to the strong survive, it doesn't mean they necessarily survive by killing everything that was weaker. It just means that they eat. They eat and they procreate, and they live by defending themselves. The strong survive means ultimately whatever has the capacity for survival gets to. That's what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean brute force. We don't trample other people because it's not productive. And ultimately it would self-destruct the species. And how would that be beneficial for survival? The strong survive is not a license to go do whatever you want because we're self-aware and those animals aren't. That's the fucking difference. We're a species, and an animal species, that can think for our fucking selves. Even as vacuous as a thinker as you may be. You can still think and formulate ideas. You can still look at animals and realize that you're not them. And you can realize that there's more to life than just eating and fucking.
Smaller countries, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with husbands beating their weak wives? What's wrong
What's wrong with it is that you're able to think and judge your actions. And the animals can't do that.
with that? You tell me, and these are all questions that atheists need to answer. We often get the burden for these. We often have to explain our God and our perspective.
That's because
Sometimes
you're making a
atheists or
positive claim.
agnostics, they're just really angry at the idea of God or God himself. They
I'm not angry at the idea of God being real. I'm angry at the idea that idiots believe it and they try to control people. And I would be angry at the idea of God being real if I actually believed it. But I'm disgusted by the implication of the belief that people believe. And I'm disgusted with how vile it really is. And even though I don't believe it's true, I believe that you believe it, and I believe that this is the implication of what you believe, and I find that disgusting. So yeah, I'm angry, but that doesn't mean I'm angry at God. It means I'm angry at your stupidity and the nature of my fucking idiotic species.
they see the pain, they see the suffering, they see the evil in the world, and they just don't know what to make of it. And they think God can't exist in a world that.
I don't think in that simplistically stupid of a way that God can't exist. I derive that there's no evidence for him, and that if he does exist, that the evidence says he's a cocksucker. That's what I derive. That there's no reason to believe it because there's no evidence. So that's the reason not to believe it, but if I was to believe it, then I'd have to fucking be rational, and I'd have to say he's an asshole.
That these evil things exist in it, and I totally understand that. But on the other side of the perspective, you've got people that are just militant, that just really hate God, that they don't love God, that they
Why should they?
don't want anything to do with God. They hate religion in any capacity, and they just want to see it crushed.
Because it's despicable, and we'd be better off and more enlightened without it. And yes, I think that it's too goddamn durable to ever be eradicated, because you cannot wipe an idea out with brute force. The only way to kill an idea is to beat it with a better and more infectious idea.
In either case, these questions do need to be answered because this is going to allow somebody who's an atheist or agnostic to help wrestle with these ideas in their mind, and they're going to have to come to grips with some of these things, whether or not they're true, either from their perspective or maybe come alongside to the religious perspective. Hey, I hope this video helps a little bit in dealing in your city with people that are atheists and people that are agnostics.
That's a
Check out the
disgusting
questions below
statement.
and read through the synopsis, and I'm going to put some book recommendations for you guys as well to just wrestle through this
Oh,
topic of atheism
oh,
about it.
oh. You have a hard time dealing with people that don't believe as you do and aren't as fucking stupid. Your life is so difficult. Fuck off. You don't need to have other people around you who aren't inducted into your cultic belief system and have some sort of defense against them because they're rational, decent human beings. Meanwhile, you're making straw mans and all these stupid fucking statements that just expose your stupidity. And people aren't dumb enough. The like to dislike ratio shows that people aren't dumb enough to fall for your bullshit. You know, that there's a reason that arguments in favor of religion have such crappy like ratio. You know, and the ones that don't, the religious videos that don't, are not religious videos that try and prove God, okay? Because it's arrogant and it's stupid. They tend to be just normal everyday videos of Christians who just fucking talk and maybe talk about positive experiences or their life or how or aspects of the faith that are positive for other Christians. But this sort of videos, they attract the atheist community, and that's why they have such dislikes, because people come to them with skeptical minds and they mock it because it's so ridiculously stupid. So there's a reason that your videos have such bad dislike ratios. It's because they're welcoming ridicule. That's it.